Welcome to the Petrichor Marching Arts Podcast, where we talk all things marching arts. My name's Bryson. I'm a songwriter, composer, and mixing engineer, teaching and designing for drum corps, marching bands, and indoor percussion groups on the East Coast, as well as my mainstay school, Newtown High School in Connecticut. I'm sitting down with performers, educators, and creators to discuss perspectives on the activity, to see where it's at now and where it's headed in the future. On today's episode, I'm talking to cymbal player, musician, teacher, Kat Godfrey, and we're going through cymbals as it pertains to her upbringing on the East Coast as a follow-up to my last episode with Rex talking about the West Coast. All right, we have one more for August. If you don't know already, I have just put out 2 other episodes. One is with Tyler Campbell, talking about college band as it pertains to his experience working with UConn, COVID teaching techniques, stuff like that. But earlier this week, I had an episode with Rex Gutierrez talking about cymbal playing and his experiences growing up, going through Pulse, RCC, Academy, and just what it was like to be a cymbal player on the West Coast. And conversely, today I have Kat Godfrey, who has grown up marching on the East Coast with United Percussion, the Reading Buccaneers. We also taught together for a season at 7th Regiment in 2018, and we're kind of covering some similar ground to what I was talking to Rex about, but a lot of it is just to get, some additional perspective on different things and kind of bring together more of a holistic perspective of just the general basics of cymbal playing, and as well as the culture, and could be a great foundation to maybe talk in the future about detailed lineages to, scouts and SCV and crossmen and all these classic cymbal lines. But again, I won't keep talking. Here's the episode with Kat Godfrey.
Cool. Well, all right, I guess we can start. So, do you want to introduce yourself? Just your name or whatever.
Hi, I'm Kat Godfrey. I play cymbals.
Cool. So I super appreciate you doing this. I told Rex the same thing, but I've noticed there's so many podcasts out, and it's basically a meme to have a podcast at the moment. But I haven't seen anything about cymbals in general at all, to be honest. Even beforehand, I see videos, like C-Vine would post their own specific videos. That was really cool, but no general information, at least that I've seen. So this is kind of the plan from when I started doing this podcast, to have some kind of cymbal series of some kind, just because, so many directors have ensembles, especially locally, that have kids that are interested, especially it seems like horn kids often are, just because they're visually oriented or something like that. And there's just no resources to kind of guide them in the right direction or even, buy cymbals in the first place. But do you want to kind of go into the background of who you are and kind of who you've performed with? It can kind of be as long as you want.
Yeah. I started band in high school, but I didn't start cymbals until college. And I started at Westchester, and then I went to Field of View for indoor, which is right around here. I did Reading Buccaneers for cymbals 2 years, and United for 2 years. So I've done a lot of indoor and outdoor, which is really cool. And I've had some, the best techs, I think. My first tech was, Crossman royalty. So it's amazing to have her.
Who was that?
There were 2 named Kelly.
Okay.
Yeah, but they were really good, both of them. And it's so fun to get the indoor and outdoor experience.
For those of you that can't see this, there's a cat in frame.
It's eating my arm. But yeah, I got a lot of different experiences, but I only know East Coast techniques, so I think that's pretty cool. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. So you also explained to me that you were doing snare drum in high school, and you said bass drum for a year?
Yeah.
So that was kind of your basis?
Yeah, it was cool. I did the percussion from 4th grade, and I did every ensemble in elementary school, middle school, and high school. So I think it was really cool to have the background of percussion. Like, I actually understood how to subdivide. And, like, even, I guess, when you play cymbals, it's usually, like, the people who are cut from other instruments. So
Yeah.
you get a lot of variation between what people know. And a lot of times it's like horn players are like, flute seems to be an instrument that a lot of cymbals originally play, which is crazy.
Yeah, I think at least one of my kids at Newtown played flute. They're like the flute section leader.
Yeah, and they're so good.
Yeah.
But it definitely helped being able to subdivide for like indoor. The music is a lot tastier, so
Right.
it takes a lot more work.
Okay. I guess we could start this by talking about, because you were doing something a bit different in high school, what was your transition like going into cymbals for the first time?
I was really lucky, like I said, because my tech was amazing, but I was in the front ensemble for surf in 2011, and my favorite section was the cymbal line, and I just followed them around everywhere. So I learned like a lot of basic stuff just watching them and talking to them. And then I already had that like in my back pocket when I first started playing. So.
Okay. And you kind of mentioned, already that there's oftentimes a lack of percussion training to begin with. Is there a culture in general, even at higher ensembles, of people just popping into certain world-class or open-class groups with only having prior knowledge of, for example, flute, like you're saying?
Yeah, that definitely happens, I think. I know at United we talked about, like, the cymbal curse. We always had somebody quit or something would happen every year, and we would lose somebody right after our, like, week and a half long time where we learn everything.
Yeah.
And then somebody always has to come in to fill it, and you don't always know if they know how to play cymbals.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if you mentioned this like a couple years ago, or for example, at SCV, like for a group like that, does that always have kids that are, or I guess any other group too, that are pre-trained on cymbals and are super knowledgeable? I would imagine like offhand stuff, maybe that's more of a requirement just because it seems, at least to me, pretty difficult. But especially like on-hand groups, would that be more common for them to seek out people that can just hold up the cymbals and are just really good at maneuvering themselves?
Yeah, I know most of the time there's like the one person in any line, even the best lines, who has never played cymbals before.
Okay.
They really don't take that long to pick up, so you can't always tell.
So I guess with an audition process, it's probably different between college, because I'm assuming it seems like college people kind of can just get moved to cymbals. I'm not really sure. I didn't have a college marching band. But what is that like? I've heard a lot about cymbal auditions being super intense, maybe even more so than some other sections of like the battery section or even other parts of the corps, just because of the physical part of it.
Yeah, I think the hardest part of auditions is that no matter what you do, it is physical. Like, you're gonna have to be holding the cymbals up the whole time. And a lot of times you do like a mile run every day. So, like, even for indoor.
Yeah.
So it'll be a physical thing. And then a lot of times you just hold at positions for as long as you can. And then there will be some visual parts, but I've never had the visual part make or break somebody, so it's usually strength.
Interesting. Okay. Because, is that something where, for example, if it's an audition at United, like if you just truly can't hang on holding up the cymbals, is that basically your line to get cut from the audition? Or is there like still leeway within that if you're like super good at choreography, for example? Like if it was like over the top good, I suppose.
I don't fully know. I think there can always be exceptions, and strength is something that like anybody can work on and get better at pretty quickly. Like especially boys can build muscle mass faster. So.
So I'm super curious, just because of, even like my own high school kids, they don't quite know like what happens at that level, like once they jump from like PSO into an independent world or independent open, like what to expect. In terms of like lower level cymbal playing and moving to that level, would you say that probably the strength aspect is still truly kind of the main difference, especially with high schools having smaller diameter cymbals and stuff like that?
Yeah, a lot of it is always going to go back to strength, but there's also whatever the tech wants. If you can change what you're doing and do what the tech wants, then they're probably going to take you over somebody who looks amazing but isn't doing like exactly the positions. You know, you just have to be able to change it up because everyone wants different things.
Yeah, so I guess similar to like the drumline or the battery, just being able to be like a moldable or teachable student, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess going back to kind of the general audience, which could be, again, like high schoolers that don't quite know what's happening or that just don't get a lot of great instruction, or even directors that just don't know how to confidently implement a cymbal line. What are kind of some of the fundamental cultural things that set up the foundation of what a cymbal line is? Because it is, interestingly enough, still like a separate thing, and that's kind of what it feels like right out of the gate, just implementing a cymbal line for the first time. But I think what's important is just how that's built up, and what are kind of the initial elements you would want to see put into a cymbal line that maybe had never had any instruction before.
That's a tough one, man. Like at the most basic level, I guess the way to start a cymbal line is to make sure that you have just general easy cymbals to play with. I've always really liked stadiums, but I think they might be too heavy for younger people. So some lines use like the really light cymbals, and I think that's a great way to get started. I would always start a cymbal line. I don't know if you know about different strap types, but there's like leather straps and nylon straps. So a lot of the decisions that you make right away can change what you want the line to be. So lighter cymbals will make it easier to learn how to do things and do it like crisply, and then also be able to put in visuals probably a little faster. Leather straps are really awesome, I think. They're a little bit stickier, but I think that nylon is too hard for people to just get started on, especially techs who don't understand, because you have to like burn them to melt it. Yeah. They're like the core necklaces, the parachute cord kind of.
So what is it different in size completely from the typical leather straps? Or is it still the same size, but you have to like tie them together or whatever in a specific way?
So you like buy a reel of it and then you cut it to the size that you need.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Yeah.
So I guess the equipment side is probably the start, I would imagine, if like we're just going to put a cymbal line to a high school for the first time, for example. So, I mean, the sizes typically go from where, like 14 to 18s or 20s or something like that?
Yeah. A lot of high schools will use like 14s, and then 20s are the biggest that I've actually seen marched.
I'd imagine that's pretty hard to put visuals in on. I really can't imagine spinning like 19s. So in terms of just the general sizes, like obviously like 14s are easier to handle, but me being like a layman, I often see still multiple sizes being used. Do you know if that's a choice specifically just for the individual player and maybe their like specific build or whatever, or is that actually used in a more musical way just because they have different pitches and timbres sometimes?
I think it could be used in a musical way if people understood it more, but it's usually for like body size. Like for bucks, I actually played 19s, and my arms are too small. Like they would hit me right in the bicep when I would pull back.
Oh, okay.
It would mess up my playing, but that's what they wanted, so.
Gotcha. Okay, so the initial cymbal size thing is just strictly related to the player. That's definitely something I didn't even really know. I feel like it's self-explanatory, but I feel like until I hear it from someone that actually like knows something, then I just am still playing some kind of mental guessing game.
It's also kind of just like what looks right, you know?
Yeah. So the straps, I guess I don't think we really need to dig so much into that, but to an extent, is it just a feel thing? Like with the nylon, is it easier to do or approach offhand stuff because of that, because it's less sticky? Is that really the appeal?
Yeah, it's really easy to do cool offhand stuff, but I do think that it makes the playing technique harder. So.
Oh, just because of the lack of like a solid grip.
Yeah, and it's also harder to clean, like to clean visuals.
That's fair. Okay. And this just popped in my head. I don't think there's also like the pads sometimes. Is that always a thing? Like the pads that are outside the bell of the cymbal so you don't burn your hand off?
Yeah, because that's for, like if your hands were on it, first of all, you would get pinched, which you already do anyway, but right. It's so that the vibration doesn't stop with like your hand on it. So when you do a crash, you're supposed to take your fingers off when you go through, and then stop it with the tip of your finger. But yeah, it's so that you're not muting anything.
Gotcha. So that's pretty much a constant.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay,
I think it's really old school to not use them, but it's really weird.
Okay, cool. And then I think the other big thing, like you mentioned the other day, is gloves versus no gloves. And I honestly didn't know there was an opinion one way or the other. I typically just see gloves, but probably just because I'm not being that observant. But can you go into detail just about the general difference between having them and not having them?
Yeah, so cymbal gloves look so cool and they feel really cool when you first get them because it makes sure that you don't hurt your wrist when you're doing offhand stuff. Just like pulling the skin a lot. But when they get a little bit old, they pull just as much. And so you either have to constantly have a new pair or just learn how to deal without them.
Right.
I am a fan of no gloves. I think we started doing that at Bucks, just because we got so sticky that it was impossible to do any visual. And then when you get sweaty enough for outdoor, it's actually more helpful. So we would just wear them for shows because I guess we were supposed to wear gloves.
Right.
But yeah, we had the discussion for a couple indoor groups as well, and we did end up wearing them because it is what everyone does pretty much. But I think if you learn how to do anything without them, I think that it feels a lot better and you have more control.
Okay. Is it more common indoors specifically just because there's less like heat and sweat going on inside those things? I'm sure there's still some, but is that like a general pull towards using them technically inside? Yeah,
and they also match uniforms usually, so I feel like that's another thing. Like it's just a uniform part.
Cool. I had never, like I said, I never heard any difference between that, so that's good to know. I know my kids will appreciate hearing that. So I feel like that covers a good base that I honestly didn't know about, of just the actual stuff itself. But can you go on about the general like culture? Like I was talking with Rex about SCB. I know we were watching them in 2018. They like almost ran me over because I wasn't paying attention, and he kind of went off into that because that's what he initially started with because of the RCC people teaching about Rancho Cucamonga in California. And it wasn't until later he even heard about the offhand stuff with Pulse when they started to bring that over. But is there like a difference between what's happening over there and here? Like, is it still like super East Coast, like same kind of vibe where it's always intense, push people out of the way thing?
Like culture-wise, I think that cymbals have always been and will always be just the hype kids. Like they're just kids who are always happy to be there, but then when you're playing, you have to be like so angry to be able to play everything and like work through the pain because everything does hurt all the time. And I do know that East Coast is still super offhand and really rigid. Like everything we have has a prep and a release. So like the prep for a regular crash is like the AV crash, and then you do the release at the end.
Oh, okay.
And it's in every position. But what I kind of know about West Coast is that they just smash cymbals together and it somehow sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it, but I think that's so cool. And I don't know if it's the same over there, but I would say yes. With all the hype that the cymbals have while they're doing everything, when everyone's supposed to, or I guess when you have a break between sets or reps or anything, cymbals are always the ones who are like working on something constantly.
Yeah.
Until you're told you can't, and then you're at standby. Like there's so much etiquette everywhere. You're always in order. You're always in line. You're always in step. I loved that about cymbals.
Okay.
But it's a little intense for other people, I guess.
Yeah. But it sounds like there's kind of like a balance. Like you're saying, it's just like, it's definitely order, but it seems like everyone tries to be happy to be there, but it's like also extremely intense at the same time with the performance quality.
Uh-huh.
Well, I find that super interesting because I feel like it's almost opposite in feel in terms of like battery percussion on the West Coast is super loosey-goosey, and on the East Coast it's notoriously the opposite of that, because it's just like old school Tom Monks, and because of Dartmouth, and because Dartmouth Cadets being such a poster child for drum corps for so long. But I mean, at least visually to me, it feels like it's more, I don't know if this is necessarily the case, just more strict on the West Coast, maybe more towards like the 2010s and maybe before that. I'm not entirely sure. And then when I think of offhand, I think of it being more, I mean, still very specific and calculated, but I mean, to me, like visually, that just looks more flowy theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's necessarily how you would characterize that, though.
Yeah, I would say that. Like, West Coast feels really rigid and clean. I love West Coast visuals, like anything that it's just like a punch and a stick.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like East Coast, you can have people doing such crazy things, and it's so hard to clean because you all have to hit the right dip of the bucket. Like at the bottom, you have to hit at the exact same time, and like everything in between has to be exactly perfect. But
Okay.
I would definitely say East Coast is more flowy, except for preps and releases.
Gotcha.
To the matches.
And is there any difference? Because I know, I mean, there's obviously the Crossman in Texas. Is there a difference between what like is happening towards like United Bucks area versus what's happening in the big Texas groups? I mean, I know Crossman is pretty much one of the staples essentially, and they do offhand primarily, right?
Yeah.
Is there a difference there at all in terms of approach?
That's really hard to say because I'm actually from Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is where Crossman was before they were in Texas.
Because they were part of YEA, right? Or I think, like, way back.
No idea.
Like the cadets organization or whatever.
Yeah.
But okay, yeah.
Before cadets was in Allentown, Crossman was up here. So, like, every band teacher I've had marched Crossman. And so, like, my tech from Westchester marched Crossman. So everything I know is kind of them. So I guess technically West Coast would just be like the really far West Coast.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So there's probably it seems pretty much passed around through the Midwest to East Coast through some of that stuff. Because I know MCM was the other example that me and Rex were talking about. Fantastique is the show that just happened to come to mind as the crazy like carnival thing. I think that was 2010. But that one came to mind because that's when they were doing, I think they like threw a cymbal over like the back props and caught it on a stick and stuff like that. And I thought that was very interesting. But I actually didn't really know that either in terms of the intensity and how that's approached via east versus mid to west or whatever. But so we've been using the terms on hand and off hand probably without people having any clue what that is. But Could you describe just what those actually are? Because I guess that's kind of the first choice in figuring out like what your ensemble vibe is, or I guess your general approach.
Yeah, so let's start with on hand. On hand is going to be anything where the pad stays on your hand while you're doing it. So, like, anything where you're flipping. I don't know if you've ever heard of sculpting before.
No.
It's like there's like an around the world where you hold one and you keep the edges together and it looks really cool, and that's called sculpting.
Oh, okay.
Just like when you move them around and it looks visually interesting, usually edge to edge somehow. But yeah, so I can't really think of much else, but you can do so much with that because you can always just like move and have other people moving at different, in different places. So I think that visuals are all about balance. So whatever you do with one person, either one side or like every other person, or like a ripple down a line, you have to think about balancing it. So there's also like, I guess when you move you usually stick somewhere, and that's kind of part of the visual. And then offhand is like exploding nowadays. So there's old school offhand, which it's the strap is still around your wrist, but you're doing like buckets or dips or anything that's going like that. And you can also reload, which can look really cool. So you just get it back on hand. And then there's the next generation, which is thumb stuff. So you can just, I feel like I should get my cymbals out. You can unload to your thumb, and then you can do all the same things you can do with your wrist, but just on your thumb. That's cool because you can like catch it in weird places, and you can do a bucket and stop it. And then the new kind of thing is just totally off your hand, so you're not holding on to anything, and you just toss it, or like you can hold it and push it, and it'll go around your arm and you can catch it back on the pad. It's also cool.
I guess that makes sense. I mean, there has to be, I would imagine there's some push for progression, since cymbals, I would imagine, can be kind of creative, especially trying to write stuff to cater to like a show concept or whatever.
Yeah.
So I didn't know you could actually do anything around your thumb.
Yeah.
I've never thought about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and the hardest part is having like 4 measures to get something off of your hand and then back on, because nobody wants to like put the cymbal here and then put it back on your hand. You want to like have it be a part of the visual. And then that's where problem solving comes in, because what happens if you don't get it on? You have to keep playing.
Yeah. And you were using terms like reload and unload, which I guess could be pretty self-explanatory. And then you also use like buckets, for example. Could you just talk about that terminology?
Yeah. So anything where you're unloading, it's usually to like what we call like a tabletop. So you just let it fall off your hand, and then it goes around and you just catch it in like a neutral position. And then the reloading part is just the opposite. So you always want to make a big circle, like a big C, so that it gets on without like bending your thumb. This is where cymbal injuries come in.
Yeah.
This thing you can catch your thumb, and reloading you can like jam it.
Okay.
But yeah, that's like the bread and butter of cymbals. And then once you can do that and also flip up and down from every position, then you can start doing the buckets, which I don't have a clue how to say over this, but that's like when you just push it and it goes down, and you have to like manipulate your wrist a little bit so that it goes around and comes back to sit on your hand. Should I get my cymbals? I have them in my closet.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, and we can also talk about positions that way too.
That's true.
If you want. All right, I'll go get those. All right, I have to make room for this.
Okay. Yeah, me and Rex like couldn't really get into so much detail because we were like talking philosophically about things. It's like we could only go so far with what we were talking about.
It is crazy. There's also like basic things. Some people say that the lower one should go on the left, but technically, if you tap it, like this one's lower.
Yeah.
But if you put them on the ground and do that, it's opposite, so it doesn't really matter. And do you know the basics of like how to put a cymbal on? Like the teardrop, the one on top, that's on the right side, so it's your right hand.
No, but now I do. Yeah.
Do you know how to tie a cymbal knot?
Yes.
Okay.
I had to do that in college for percussion, so that's the one thing I do now.
All right, so here we go. What were we talking about?
Buckets, specifically.
Oh, right, like a release, just because I was doing it with my hand, is this thing.
Okay. Gotcha.
It's too hard to just talk about it.
Yeah.
And then a reload is just that. Like you just get it back on.
So it's kind of like the release is like an outward flip, for example, to the right of you, or of your right arm going out to the right, if I watched that correctly.
Yeah, I don't think I would call it a flip just because it's a release.
Yeah.
You can put pinky pressure and open your palm, and then it just goes around.
Okay. And you catch it mixing up. That's technically okay.
And then, I don't know if I have room. A bucket is just like this thing.
Oh.
So that's what it does. And then there's an egg beater, which is a bucket with a dip on the end. So a dip is the opposite of a bucket. So a bucket goes that way, and a dip goes this way.
That's so wild.
And together, you get that.
Whoa.
And you can do it on like front and back, and you can keep going. And
Okay. We need to like find like a link to like a second of someone doing this. I could like post it with
I know.
like a YouTube video, because I put these on YouTube.
Yeah. And then you can get to thumb in different ways, but like it's just on my thumb, and you can do like this stuff, and like you can do a bucket too.
That's crazy.
Reload back on your hand.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, that was like way more complicated than I thought it actually was. But okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then there's like more off the hand, which I can show you if I move onto the carpet, but...
You don't necessarily have to do that.
Okay. Because it makes no sense to say like a description of it.
Yeah. So I guess on the topic of terminology, so those are probably three primary things. But there's different types of crashes, and if I understand correctly from what Rex is telling me, some of those names could be interchangeable, sometimes from just school to school.
Yeah.
But could you list off just some like super general types of crashes that people might encounter?
So you usually learn the vertical. This is vert. That's where you do like all these bad boys. And then that one, you choke here because they all have different choke areas. So like 90% of the time you would choke in your armpits. And then there's this guy, which sometimes I think can be called horizontal, but that's not horizontal.
It's that slight angle.
Yeah, it's like everyone says a seat belt. So like from your shoulder to your hip. And this one depends on where you are. Like Bucks, we played them up here, and then United, we played them way lower. This one...
Does that with projection at all? Just because Bucks has a horn line? I don't know if that actually makes a difference, but...
I don't know. I think it's just like tradition, like whatever the line did. So yeah, you pull back and you crash through, and to choke, you usually do it down here like a little snow plow.
Right.
It's also called, I've always called it flat, And you can also get gumption, which I think is a West Coast name. I have no idea where that came from. And then there's one a little bit lower where it's like lined up with your hip bone, and that's the horizontal one. And this one has the two different ways of playing it. You can do alligator toilet seat, and you can do snowplow, or you can do a fun one that's like this in both of your hip bones, but that one hurts if you hit your hip.
Okay.
And then you can also do the fancy way, which is way harder, which you get your A. So it's the same as up here, but it's down here. So you get A, V, crash, and then you choke this way, which is...
Oh. Is that like armpit and hip, basically, or is there...
Oh, it's straight, like against your arm, which is really hard. And then, yeah, like straight here in your armpit over here.
Oh, okay.
It's cool, but it's really hard to get those straight lines.
And then AV, for people listening, is literally as it sounds, right? Just creating an A shape and a V shape.
Yeah.
And then there's also, I don't know all the terminology, but like sizzles and, yeah.
Yeah, so there's sizzles, which you can do from anywhere. You can do sucks on their own, or you can do side sucks. There are taps, which you can do anywhere, and then there are also zetians, which you have to keep one of them still. People don't always do that, but you keep one still and you scrape on the other one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with crashes in general, I know, maybe I want to save this for later on, but with the music that you've gotten through United and Bucks, is it always standardly written down what you need to do? Are you getting rhythms and then the cymbal tech and the performers kind of interpret that into the actual notes being played to kind of match what's happening in your orchestration? I guess it depends on how comfortable the battery arranger or percussion arranger is. But is there like a difference between groups? Is there one thing you're used to in terms of that?
Yeah, I think that the music is usually written, and then you can ask a cymbal tech to like look over it and say what you want. But usually it's already written when we get it, and the only thing we do is take notes out, which doesn't happen too often, but I mean, it does at the end of the season, but
yeah.
Yeah, and that's where you can get really creative. Like if you don't have that much time between two notes, you can either just play them or you can put a visual in and like release into a crash.
And is there if there's splits, like are those written out as rhythms, or is that something that's also dictated like what the players arranged in like the staff?
It's usually I can't even remember. So notation changes just a little bit, but usually it's all written on one line.
Okay.
They're not going to split it for us because they can't. Because people don't usually know how long we need between notes.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's usually like we have to split our own music. So we were talking about like autonomy of cymbal lines. Like we are our own everything.
Yeah.
So we split our notes, and then we also decide where we want them, like position wise. And then a lot of times that goes into like writing the visuals that we want in there. And that has to go with what the music sounds like. Like if you hear, I don't know, if it's something that's really loud and with like a lot of accents, then you're not going to want something flowy. But if it's like a bass run, then it would be super cool to have something flowy. You know?
Yeah. And if you're just splitting anything in general, is there any kind of rhyme or reason? Like, is it split like if you have 5 people, is it the middle, outer, and then the 2 in between with splits? Like, is there any kind of way to go about that?
Yeah, usually things are split Like if you have 5, it'll be evens, odds.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if it's 6, you can do 1 through 6, evens, odds, or top 3, bottom 3.
Oh, okay.
And usually if there's a crescendo, you'll start with 1 and then add in 2 and add in the line.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I guess on that same point, so you mentioned like 6 people in a cymbal line. Is there like a cap to like, is it typically no bigger than 6 for a cymbal line, and then like typically like in the 4 to 6 area?
I guess it depends. I know Westchester, like college band, my first year we started with 13. I think that UD does it really well. They actually do like 14 or so, but they have 2 lines. So it's usually the people who are more experienced go in the front, and then it's like a cymbal flub line in the back.
Right.
5 is my favorite by far, but 6 you can do. It kind of looks like a lot of people, though, especially because like drum lines usually don't have that many.
Yeah.
No, I guess snares, but they're so close together.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. I mean, we use 5 at Newtown typically, but that is a good point because it can be, I guess, in a sense, could be overpowering depending on how it's being done. But I guess that would maybe in high school is but kind of cause more cymbal lines to be more visually and choreographed or choreography oriented rather than playing oriented, especially indoors. Maybe outdoors it wouldn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe indoors it's like you can only put out so much sound. I guess you could also just make a judgment, okay, we'll just have 4 cymbals. But with Newtown, we do so much choreography that I've never really actually thought about that. And they end up playing most often during a lot of the louder parts unless we have like specific choreographed solos or something like that, or like a cymbal feature. I don't know where I'm going with that. I just never thought about that.
No, it's cool.
I guess more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm just answering my own question, but anyways, okay, but that's cool. Yeah, so I actually forgot about college lines. I was working at UNH for a second, and they have a bunch of people, and then same thing with UConn now with Tyler. But okay, but I guess on that same note, so there is like, obviously the visual side is super important. And, you know, when I'm thinking of my kids specifically, we do so much choreography just because we do have kids that are great at it, and because we have someone that's able to do that for us and write all of that and handle all the teaching with that. But is there like a point to where too much choreography is just kind of like exploiting the cymbal players and turning them into like a floor ensemble as opposed to a cymbal player? Because I know like in some places a lot of the time, you know, maybe crashes aren't so prevalent, which sucks. And I think that happens a lot in high school because of the lack of knowledge. But have you ever felt like you as a cymbal player have been exploited to a degree in indoor because of the visual responsibility on the floor?
The only way that it actually sucks is if you're on prop crew. Like cymbals of every group spend almost all of their time doing props.
Okay.
And it sucks when it's like the 3rd minute of a show and you finally pick up your cymbals.
Yeah.
So like choreography with cymbals on is totally fine. Like the more you can do, the better. Because we can, even if we have to play, like I remember my first year at United, we had a zipper on the uniform and we played off the zipper, which was super cool. And you couldn't hear it, so it didn't really matter.
Okay.
But stuff like that is so fun. It's just like when you spend so much time learning how to play an instrument that nobody understands, and then it feels like nobody cares because you're on props for like 4 minutes of a 7 or 8 minute show.
Right.
That's when it's too far. But cymbal players are usually really good at like, I don't want to say dancing, like full out dancing, but like doing body visuals and rolling around.
Because I've always wondered that because, you know, I'm just a fan of Broken City's design just as a designer. And I noticed in their packet, I think it was especially like 2 years ago, they had like a cymbal packet you could download, and it was just a page that said "Show up and be a ninja." So I've always wondered if that's like something a cymbal player would see and be like, fine, or like
audition there if I saw that.
Yeah. Okay. I was always curious about that because, again, I don't really know. But typically, like for an ensemble like United, would you have like a legitimate like sheet of maybe just specific crashes or just general technique before you get there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They have the whole packet and like a lot of times it has a breakdown of what every position is and how to do them, because like we talked about earlier, you're going to have people who have never played cymbals before, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I remember I also auditioned at CWP, but like for me, a lot of the places I auditioned and didn't go back to, I just didn't have a good vibe of like who was there on the line, you know, because personalities are really, really important for a line.
Yeah.
But they also had like a really nice packet, and I think people share them around, so most places have about the same thing.
Okay.
With just like starter information.
And that does remind me, like I mentioned this the other day, about bass lines and how they're a bit different from the snares and tenors, where, I mean, if they're not in sync, it's going to be really bad. It's just Swiss cheese and it just doesn't sound good. So like, for example, like the guys at Scouts would, if they were on a Walmart run, they'd always buy like the same shirt and they just wear the same shirt all the time, or they'd like put their sleeping bags in order all the time, or just like follow each other around like ducks. I would say it reminds me a lot of kind of what you're describing with cymbals. And I guess with bassline, it's more specific to the fact where they're like playing a singular part. And if they miss a note, it's not good. But with cymbal lines, is it just more of, it seems like more of like a camaraderie thing. And obviously you have to be extremely focused and in sync. Is a lot of being a cymbal line in terms of that kind of collective thought process involved with just making sure that everything in terms of the visual side, especially, is just extremely in unison?
Yeah, I feel like every line I've been in, if you don't have that creepy hive mind, then you're doing it wrong, you know? Yeah, I don't know if it's because we're always so physically tired from everything that we do, but cymbal fights happen all the time. We're like brothers and sisters, or cats and dogs, I don't know, but
yeah,
I guess it goes back to the autonomy. Like, if we have to make all of our own decisions, we feel like we are so much more a part of it all, which makes it harder when we don't all agree. And
okay.
Yeah, so I do think that the hive mind and like having matching shirts and wearing them on the same day and everything being the same is really important for a line.
Yeah, and I guess like you're saying, just because you're always so separated as opposed to what a bass line would be. Like they're still with the battery, but with the cymbal line they're always separated. I guess having that morale being up as often as possible is probably ideal. Sounds like.
Yeah, there was actually, I totally forgot to say this. I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but a lot of cymbal lines will do like a certain number of reps in, and then they'll take a certain number of reps out. So it's like 3 and 2. So you'll play 3 in a row and then take 2 off. And the only year I didn't do that was my first year at United. And it was amazing because for some reason, the cymbal line would play first and the drum line would listen and like think out how their parts go with it. And then we would add in like the quads and then the basses and then the snares. And that was so cool.
Who was there doing that? Was that when Jeff Bickford was still there?
No, that was Paul Nalesnik.
Okay. I've never actually thought about that.
Second year, but that was so cool the first year. Although it really hurt because we didn't get any reps off.
Yeah.
But besides that, it was awesome.
So would you recommend just in general, like still doing the reps on, reps off? Probably for a high school, I would imagine. Maybe not, though, depending on the actual size and weight of the cymbals, I guess. But is that something you pretty much recommend across the board?
Yeah, I think that's where the tech comes in. Like 3 and 2 is a really strong thing because cymbal techs, for some reason, are never there. So you really have to set up the etiquette and everything early. So if you decide to do 3 and 2, I think you should just always do it. And the only thing with that is you have to pay attention. Like if they say this is the last rep and it's your 4th one, then you're still in, you know? So
Okay.
let's play the last rep. And then that's also where the cymbal tech comes in. Like, if your line is really struggling that day, you should give them more breaks.
Right.
Because they need it mentally.
Okay. I forgot about we did do that at Newtown, but I always forget about like little details like that.
Yeah.
So obviously one of the biggest parts is creating visuals. Is that something where you get a piece of music and like the opportunity is not so much the notes, but also just the actual space that you're given?
Yeah, usually it's the space, and then if you're like in the middle of a visual and you see that there's a note there, then you have to figure something out, and you'll just like do an offhand crash or something. But those are tough because it doesn't usually sound as good. So if it's just you and the pit isn't playing a crash there, you have to be really careful.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to take in all of these different environmental things. And then you also have to be prepared when you get drill. This happened to me indoor and outdoor. They don't care what number cymbal you are. You're going to go where they say. You're just a dot.
Yeah.
So your music will change no matter what. And then your visuals will change. So it's just always changing. Or like the director will be like, I didn't like that one. And you have to just cut the visual.
Right. And is creating the visuals, are you always or more so taking from things you've seen in the past or things that have been shared around? Or is there still a lot of a culture of just trying to, I think I mentioned this earlier, like trying to create things to fit the concept or even just the musicality of how something feels during that phase of the show?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. And then you also have like the stock ones that you're always going to do. Like SCV has the Viper or whatever. Yeah. Bucks and Crossman, we got it from Crossman, I think, has like this guy, and United also does it. Mm-hmm. So you have like those little Easter eggs, and then in different places you'll try to do what the music and the show are saying, and then other times you just want to do something really cool and you have the time.
Yeah. Okay. And so I'm kind of like bouncing around, and I feel like in weird ways just because I don't know what I'm talking about.
Cool.
But I guess continue on the idea of the strength thing. I mean, I was watching videos of Crossman and SCV earlier, and I was thinking, watching SCV, like especially with just consistent stuff where they're doing like a sizzle, I'm paying attention just like how focused they actually are. Like they look like their eyes are going to pop out of their heads, which is dope. But I was thinking about like how much of a challenge it is to maintain a consistency of something, for example, like a sizzle, while you're actually moving on the field. Because I'm watching them like, oh wait, they're marking time, like they're actually navigating the drill. Mm-hmm. So obviously the strength facilitates the consistency in that, but how much of a challenge throughout the season is just continuing to build synchronicity, I guess, between the players with that consistency, and so that the sizzles or whatever's happening, as anything, is actually happening in unison and not being so different player to player. Like, is that just like a lifelong struggle thing?
Partially, yeah. I remember 2 examples from Bucks. We used to never make people do this. We used to do the Iron Cross, which you have your cymbals on and you just go like this. You definitely have shoulder problems from that.
Yeah.
But we would do that for like 3 minutes straight and then go straight into a rep because that's what it felt like at that part of the show, you know, like auditioning for being tired at the end of the show, which I was tired at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever done Bobby Jones drill, but it's wild. The cadets 2018, they're crazy, like running around drill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Where was I going? Oh, and then we had a mid-season switch from 19s. So whoever was on 18s went to 19s, and who was on 19s went to 20s. Mm-hmm. And it was in the middle of a percussion ensemble. And they're only 2 pounds lighter, like total. I think it went from 8 to 10 pounds. Mm-hmm. And my friend and I, set to set, we were dying. We couldn't even hold them up. So
yeah.
It was really strange realizing how weak we were. And there was even a point in the season where we still, at the end, we would turn around and play, and we just couldn't even hold them up. So we would bring them in, which don't ever do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a struggle with strength through the end of the season and even into the next one.
Right. Okay. So I guess the next thing I wanted to touch on, which kind of goes off of the autonomy thing, is, I mean, cymbal lines seem to be ignored by judges very often. And does that change? I mean, sometimes, a lot of the times, I feel like staff members too, that are not involved with the cymbals directly. Do you think that's because of just the general lack of understanding? Because it's hard, because it is like this autonomous thing that it's like, if you don't know what's happening, it's just going to exist there and it's going to continue to exist. But do you experience a lot of being, I guess, literally ignored during rehearsals at times, especially from judges? Because I would imagine it's weird to do shows all the time where there's just always this critique, and maybe they don't even call you out unless they think it's like too loud or something. Yeah,
I think this is more of like every indoor it happens, because you can't see us when we walk away to do something. So like if we go to another room, there have been multiple times when we have been forgotten. Like they've started percussion ensemble and we're still out there. Like we have to pay attention and know when to come in.
Right.
So we've been ignored by like the actual people in our group. And then Bucks 2015, my first year, the cymbal line had a feature at the very beginning of the show, and it was so good. It was clean every time, and it was part of the pre-show, so it actually didn't count for anything.
Oh.
I got comments, and that really sucked. I've always heard that cymbals are used to like cover up dirt, and we can only subtract points, so a lot of people don't want us because people don't understand us.
Yeah.
So it does kind of stink that like even the drumline people around us have no idea anything about us, but it's just part of the territory for now, hopefully.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, it seems so strange to me that I just can't find info about it unless I like talk to someone like you directly about it that has like experienced being an actual cymbal line.
I think it's so. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you can go ahead. I was going to say it seems like a struggle for kids that want to get into it because they don't really have resources necessarily.
Yeah, I think it would take people writing stuff for cymbals with other groups, like. I think it was Pulse 2018. The snares and the cymbals had a feature together, and like just the way that they knew how to use the cymbals to be quiet and blend in with the snares, it was awesome. I feel like there are ways for us to blend with every different pod of drums, you know, and like even the pit. But for some reason, well, I guess this goes back to not having a lot of percussion training. A lot of times our features are really lame, and then they get cut because they're lame. You can't play them, or like we're not taught how to. And yeah, I like indoor especially, our stuff is usually cut. We did at United always have a ton of dotted eighth notes, which are so cool, but it took us so long to figure it out. Like a snare had to come in and play with us so that we could do it.
Right.
But I think that kind of goes into like ignoring us again, because we don't have the training and we're given music that we can't achieve on our own. And we oftentimes don't have somebody to teach us how to do that part. And I remember there's something in music somewhere, and we had body for it. And it was like dotted eighth note music and like triplets in the feet. And we were like, I don't know how to do this. And somebody came over and tried to do it, and then was like, oh, we need to change what you're doing.
Right.
It's just like they had no idea why we were struggling so much.
I was talking to Rex about this too, but I've always seen cymbals as very choreographed performers and stuff like that. I think drum corps, I see it a bit differently. But indoor, because I work with cymbals more often indoor, I've kind of seen it that way a lot. And I don't know if you've seen this show before. It was last year. It was Vessel. Actually, I think they're from California. I'm not really sure. I can try to send you a link of this, but they had this show where they were playing the theme to the movie The Revenant, which is like, it's just big string chords and then just silence. And they were doing this thing where they had kind of this like wind idea in those spaces. And they did this thing with the snares too, where they're like playing super quiet buzz rolls and doing body in there, but they're using the cymbals to like mimic wind, and they're playing like a cymbal feature that fit inside that texture. And it like totally changed my perspective of cymbals completely, because they really just literally put them in the forefront. Everyone just disappeared. It was like only cymbals doing anything on the floor. I don't know. I bring that up because I don't know if there's necessarily been a lot of stuff like that. Like, how often do you see like ensemble silence and just cymbals? Because I really don't know.
Yeah, I can't really think of any others. And there's a lot of sounds that cymbals have. I don't know if you have ever heard like the whale call.
Oh, is that like the grinding thing?
Yeah. Which nobody wants to hear that, but like that could be used for something, So I think there could be a lot more of that isn't done just because nobody knows how. Yeah.
And it seems like something that would be more popular, because I know a lot of percussion arrangers can be percussion majors in college, and it's not like they don't learn how to play cymbals. I mean, a lot of people will teach you how to play paradiddles on cymbals in college and like all these crazy things. And it kind of blows my mind that a lot of like texture specific stuff with cymbals doesn't show up in the writing, and it's very it feels like very choreographed to like past ideas.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it would be jarring, or if it would be a good thing for maybe those more percussively inclined writers to take more leeway and ownership over the actual sounds being produced and give their ideas for the ensemble, and then have like the cymbal tech interpret those. I know that would probably be very vague and maybe make more sense at like a top level group.
Yeah, I think that is a cool idea, but I have had a time when I was in a group where we were given a really cool solo, and a lot of times it'll say like soft this kind of sounding thing, and then we want like this over here, like play on the ground, and it's like, but I don't know what sound you want, and and then you spend like hours doing that, and because they don't know what sounds you can make, they just scrap it.
Okay.
So I feel like the person writing might have to get their hands on a pair of cymbals. But like we can play off of everything. Like a prop, you could hit it with a cymbal
Yeah.
or round or whatever. So there's a lot of creative stuff out there that has not been touched.
Okay. I mean, it makes me wonder if as long as the arranger has a cymbal tech, if they should just include them more directly in the writing process and just drop their ego. Because, I mean, that seems like the most direct way to fix that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's not, but...
Maybe that goes into how a lot of cymbals don't know how to write music. So, like, if somebody says write a thing like this, it's not going to be what they want. But working together, it should be.
Okay. That's another thing I've never thought of. That makes sense. I guess if you were to at least maybe even just build up like a year-to-year writing relationship with an actual cymbal player, then it would make it... I guess over time there'd be like some lessons actually learned both ways.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I like sometimes just think of things and I just like keep going off in another direction in my head and then I just move on. But
some of my friends that you were doing this and they were all so excited. Like the cymbal community is so excited to have any amount of recognition.
Rad, because there's so many cymbal players.
And no lines.
Yeah. I get. Well, there's that too, right? So obviously indoor is one thing, but drum corps. What year was it? Was that like 2 or 3 years ago where they just started dropping like flies? They just started dropping on the cymbal lines?
I've always heard it's because they want more low brass or color guard. And they take 5 more of those than having cymbals.
I feel like that doesn't make sense anymore. I guess color guard's one thing, not even, but like, especially low brass, it's like, we have electronics in the front ensemble, so I guess I know that like brass is like a totally different texture and all that, but
yeah.
I mean, I guess brass players don't really care.
We can only take points away, so I mean, right. I don't know if that's true, but I believe it.
But it makes me wonder, like, because I would understand that because they hear something they don't like or something pops out and they're like, make a comment about that. But I feel like that's just accountability on the judges, where if they don't know how to provide positive musical or constructive musical comments to the cymbals, it's like the judges are kind of being destructive in that way.
Yeah, and also not ever talked about visually unless we're like out of place. And you can see our whole body, so our marching technique has to be really good.
Right. And I brought up this example with Rex too, where the other Teal in drum corps, Lauren Teal, who I think is currently the only female percussion caption at the moment because the Blue Knight staff left for the season. But she was talking about how at Troopers, Sandy Rennick would sometimes write stickings that were from like common marimba literature, where if you like knew anything about studying marimba, like you'd know the piece it was from. But they would get like 0 credit in terms of difficulty for that. And it's like, if you knew, you would know, but the judges aren't necessarily held accountable for understanding that stuff. And it's like, it becomes like, okay, like creativity is super fun. And especially for the performers, it's like totally makes sense. And they're super jazzed about it, but there's like no credit to be made from it. And it makes me wonder, same thing as the cymbals, like if the problem is more so just with judging and the lack of accountability for them. I don't know if you feel any type of way about that, but
I know nothing about judges. Cymbals don't get comments, and also like you can have the worst drum corps and the best cymbal line in like all time, and so it doesn't really matter. So I've never attention to the scores or tapes or anything.
That's interesting though, because it still like feeds the same like individualized culture that people kind of push to the side, which I think is so strange for them to like just let a whole section go from the judging. Yeah. But
they need a cymbal tech.
Yeah.
Or a cymbal judge, sorry.
And like you said, like you can have a great or a bad drum corps and a great cymbal line. do those cymbal lines typically only go recognized by other cymbal players, and that's just kind of how it is, and then people don't even necessarily know what's going on?
Yeah, I know for a while Surf had a really good cymbal line, and like people would go on to great places from Surf, which Surf is a great like feeder place, but to think you could get into like Rhythm X from Surf, but it happens. It just, nothing matters. Everything is different.
Interesting. So it's bizarre to me that everything is so ignored. And I hate it because I was also a person that was ignoring things.
Non-essential.
Yeah. But I think because of the design element, I've started to pay more attention and realize how much potential there is. So I hope people start to figure things out with that. Because, I mean, that vessel, I'll show you the clip of the vessel show. That was like my favorite part of the actual show. And it like flipped my brain upside down. It's like, oh, they exist or whatever else. But yeah, is there any kind of way you hope to see cymbals used in the future? I know obviously like the extreme example is, ensemble silence cymbals. But I mean, in terms of a drum corps show, like where are you in terms of the drill? Are you just marching, doing visuals, and then playing when you're needed? Are you ever like showcased at any point, or are you always in the background?
I think it depends. Usually we're kind of in the background, but like Bucks, that one year we started the show, which was super cool. Mm-hmm. And then there was like a quad cymbal feature in the middle of the show, which was kind of cool. But I don't think a cymbal feature for outdoor makes any sense at all because you can't hear us.
Yeah, true.
Like, it would have to be so visually appealing that everyone would have to look at us. So I'm cool with outdoor. I think it's just cool to have a lot of notes for outdoor.
Okay.
And then indoor is different. You don't need as many notes because you can do so many more visuals, you know?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so I don't think I necessarily have anything else in terms of cymbals. Do you have anything that you particularly want to touch on at all?
Not that I can think of now.
Okay, cool. So at this point, at the end of the stuff, this is where I usually ask like someone's favorite something. So because you like books, do you have a favorite book, whether that be of all time or of just like late? And I know those questions are always like the most daunting thing ever. I probably wouldn't be able to answer my favorite artist or something, but.
Oh man, like favorite all time, I couldn't even tell you. I have no idea. I never read a book twice, so I'm the worst that way. But I'm reading the Hannibal series, so right now I guess that's my favorite.
Okay, true. And then we've talked about some music, but is there any music lately that you are typically listening to?
I've been into clipping for a long time, but more recently I've gotten more into Home Shake. Do you know them?
No.
It's good. You should check them out.
What do they do, or what genre is it?
I don't know.
If you can pinpoint it. Yeah.
It's like kind of a lo-fi, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. That's fair. No, I typically ask people because I feel like sometimes it like with certain people it gets to like very specific parts of their individual personality and stuff. Like with Rex, he does screen printing. Mm-hmm. And he has this kind of like artistic thing that he does, or this kind of like business that he bases around it called Slop Haven. And we got in this like, I think we went 30 minutes over because we were talking about how you can interpret like your inner world through like visual art or music. So sometimes it goes off in that direction. So I usually just offer it up just in case.
That'd be my music history stuff.
Yeah. But cool. Yeah, I don't think I necessarily have anything else. But yeah, I appreciate this so much.
Yeah.
even for people like me, I am standing in rehearsal and just don't know what to do. Because it's like high schools, like techs will tech multiple sections at any given point because it's not so like elitist like it is in drum corps, which makes more sense in drum corps. And I'm just like kind of watching them and making like timing corrections because I just don't know what's going on. So super helpful. And I'm sure it'll be helpful for everyone else too, just to like have general knowledge. But cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.